The opioid epidemic. It's something you hear about in the news. How bad it's been, how bad it is. You might have an acquaintance or know a friend of a friend struggling through it. But more often than not, drug problems are a quiet illness that can be easily ignored if it isn't directly affecting you yourself. So naturally, we have a fear of drugs, and often of drug users. They're bunched in with the low and dirty, the rejects of society. But this isn't how we should be treating the problem at all. Knowing the history, seeing the numbers, reviewing the options, it leads to a single story that should really be in the spotlight of addiction treatment around the world. No country has been so progressive and so successful in eliminating drug-related illness than Portugal. Their secret? Legalization. And a whole lot of advances in sustainable healthcare. So what's the trade-off? Well, before everything, we should briefly understand the history of Portugal at the time. After years of tyranny under the Salazar dictatorship and the gradual loss of Portuguese colonies, the country was at an economic gutter. Drug use was at an extreme, especially heroin, an easy-to-produce opioid, now mostly replaced by stronger substances like fentanyl, but back then it was the go-to opioid, and it was difficult to understand. After years of high addiction rates and the highest HIV infection rates in the EU, something had to be done. A unique strategy was proposed in 2000 to completely legalize possession and use of previously controlled drugs, instead funneling the money that used to be flowing towards law enforcement into the public health sector. The strategy was implemented in 2001. Their methods involved a process called harm reduction, with an objective to reduce the amount of mental and physical damage to the patient. Strategies included needle exchange at any pharmacy, establishment of safe injection sites, and a media campaign to change the attitudes of the public. Later, they introduced substitution therapy into the strategy, which became extremely popular amongst addicts. This replaces the substance they had been dependent on with one that's less likely to harm them. It's done in a controlled environment, like a specialized treatment facility. Eventually, they are taken off the medication, and their withdrawal symptoms are less extreme. The results of the legalization have been debated, but largely the effort was successful. HIV rates have fallen sharply. While still higher than the EU average, they've come a long way, formerly attributing 50% of all HIV cases to infected needles. But there's something else to Portugal's drug policy that stands out. And while, of course, it's great to prevent HIV and overdoses which end lives entirely, something smaller and yet so much bigger has improved as well: the attitude. The one negative effect of drugs that can't be measured in overdose statistics or infection rates is the interpersonal stresses, concerns of family members and friends, and all of the tears and sadness that come from losing people to addiction. As fewer people face the consequences of violence and punishment for mental health issues, stigma is reduced and collective stress is converted into constructive concern. We live in a world where change is the only constant. What we believe now may soon be considered unacceptable, and nothing stands out to me more right now than our attitudes towards drugs. Take examples like Portugal. They only make me see the reality more clearly. It's not the drugs that are bad, and it isn't the people either. It's the bad attitudes made of old fears handed down from the stories of worried parents and theirs before them.